Thank you for joining us on the Winning and Selling Podcast. I'm Professor Scott Plum of the Minnesota Sales Institute, and with me is Bill Hellkamp of Reach Development Systems.
Is any sale a good sale, or should the salesperson be concerned with profitability? Do you get paid on raw sales amounts, or are you compensated on the profitability of the final numbers? Can salespeople be trusted to negotiate the final contract, or do the immediate dollar signs get in their eyes? Well, hold on to your wallets as Scott and I discuss maintaining your profit margin and other valuable lessons on episode 599 of the Winning at Selling podcast.
Well, Bill, that's a wide scope of questions, and it all relates to maintaining the profit margin. So if any of those questions stuck that you can relate to, we're going to be talking about that after we cover the book.
Yeah, the book is great.
Yeah. I'm really loving these stratospherical success laws, and I'm thinking
even if you can't say stratospherical.
That word wasn't being used by anybody else, so the authors got the thesaurus out and said, hey, how about we pick this word and use it? And it's like, okay, well, it's sticking if that's your goal. But in this section, when we're covering chapters 8 and 9 of Go Giver by Bob Burg and John David Mann. In this section, we're covering the third law of stratospheric success, which is the law of influence, which means your influence is determined by how abundantly you place other people's interests first. And I think that it's also safe to add or above your interests. Is that a good interpretation of that law, Bill?
Yeah, and I think that's very difficult to do, which is why few people do it. We are so interested in our own self that it's very hard to be selfless with others.
Well, I think a lot of us have a survivor's mentality, and we always try to look for what's in our best interest. And if everybody knows that, how we communicate with other people in the words and the process and the approach is going to be advantageous to both people. It's like when we did How to Win Friends and Influence People. It wasn't your way, it wasn't my way, it was a better way.
Mm-hmm.
If we have conversations about other people's interests, then it makes it a lot easier for us to be able to know what we need to do to fill them and what we can ask for in return. So this chapter opens up about talking about networking. And a network is a group of people you know, like, and trust. And that's italicized here. So that means that we're probably going to hear about it later, like you've said in the past.
That's right.
These people in your network are referred to as your personal walking ambassadors.
Mm-hmm.
So true. So true. I've heard Mark LeBlanc talk about getting advocates, getting 25 advocates. And Mark LeBlanc is a good person for you to follow if you haven't heard about his name before. And I love the word ambassador. I've talked about a market ambassador in past episodes with go out and approach the prospects as a market ambassador, that you understand the industry, you understand the challenges that they have, and you understand the solutions that you're able to provide. And ironically, the authors talk about stop keeping score. We brought that up a couple episodes ago about stop keeping score. Be generous in everything that you do. So it's just amazing how these principles are overlapping. So they talk about don't keep track of the referrals that you give to other people. They say that's not networking, that's poker. And
I think that's the human condition, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Is this desire to say, well, I gave you a referral, you need to give me something in return. And I think it's easy to, I wouldn't say easy, but I think it's possible to repress that some.
Mm-hmm.
But when we've given referral after referral to somebody, or even to a group of people, let's say that we've started with this attitude and we haven't seen anything come back, it can be very disappointing to think I'm giving all these, I'm helping all these people, and it's not even recognized. I think you mentioned in the last podcast some people that you put together to work together, and they forgot entirely that you were the one that had put them together.
Right. Yeah.
But again, I don't think we should look for the return where we made the deposit.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the challenge is we want a direct correlation between the return and the deposit, and it's not always there. Sometimes that return will come in an area you don't even recognize that it came from the work that you did, the networking that you did, the giving that you did. So you just can't keep score because the scoreboard is too big.
Yeah, I look at some of the companies that I work with, and I do gravitate towards companies that make a public commitment to their profession and their prospects. When you sponsor an event and your logo is up on the screen or in the program or on the handout, you're making a public commitment to your reputation, and you want to support the audience of attendees because you're a perfect fit of a supplier to a solution that some of the audience, the prospects are experiencing. So that's really a great example of, putting it out there and hoping that it sticks to somebody who finds it valuable and interesting. There's another line in the book, and I love this. They use the example of keeping track of who owes and who owes what.
Yeah.
That's not a friend. That's a creditor. So it's like that is so true. So they talk about playing poker versus networking and being a friend versus being a creditor. And I think about putting it out there without expecting anything in return. This book is like kryptonite to a very popular networking group that might meet once a week. And I
Hmm.
think about the contrast between the two. I'm like, wow, that is so different. Today's marketplace versus something that was started 20, 30 years ago.
Well, that's why I've never joined a networking group,
Mm,
because I didn't want the responsibility to say I have to give you leads
right.
on
Yeah.
a regular basis. I don't work with 50 companies
Mm-hmm.
at a time. I worked with 2 or 3 companies at a time. I just don't need or have that huge network maybe that a full-time salesperson would want or have. And I've always felt inadequate to joining a networking group because I felt that it would be too much pressure. I would rather find the opportunity with somebody I like than be forced to say, "Oh, I need to give leads to these 5 different types of businesses."
Well, so true. I think in our business, we look for one relationship and one or two transactions over that relationship, but we start to become very sort of qualifying when it comes to who we want to have a relationship with that is going to turn into a transaction
Right.
and to deliver value for both sides of the people in the equation. I want to set up the next chapter of the book, but before I move on to that, there was a line, and I can't remember who said it, if it was Pindar or Sam, but the line is 50-50 is a losing proposition. Do you remember that line in the book?
Yeah, I do. And that's, I think, what they're referring to there is that we're always counting.
Keeping score. Yeah.
Keeping score. I did my share. You need to do your share. I did my
Hmm.
50%. You need to do. And I've always heard this in marriage. You can't do a
Oh, yeah.
50-50 marriage. It's got
Right.
to be
Right.
100%, 100%.
Yes.
And you have to do your 100% whether your partner is doing their 100% or not. But if you keep score, you're going to be in trouble.
Hmm.
And I heard somebody say about marriage, but I think this happens. This relates to the book too. Try to outserve one another.
Hmm.
Don't, instead of saying I'm going to try and see if she's going to help me or he's going to help
Right.
me. It's how can I serve them without thinking or counting.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can do more because they're my friend or I love them or whatever.
Hmm.
So
God, I went to Promise Keepers back in the 90s when the Metrodome was still standing. It was sold out, full of men. And I remember one of the speakers said this line vividly. And the line is that he made a commitment to his wife that he is going to outserve her.
right.
And she made a commitment to him that she is going to outserve him. And the exciting stories that he shared about how they both lived that commitment was just absolutely profound. And how many years ago was that? 30 years ago? And I still remember that line vividly. And
Yep.
I love how that ties in here. So, lastly, I'm going to talk about Joe goes home. He learns this lesson. He sees his wife, Susan, and they make a deal that they're only going to complain about their day for a certain period of time. And somehow Susan starts and
Well, that had
Joe
been
is
their deal for a long time.
right. Yeah.
Right. They
Yeah.
each got a half hour to
Yeah.
whine
Yeah.
about their day. Right. This had been their
Hmm.
long standing habit.
Ritual. It's
Yeah.
almost
There
a
you go. There you go.
ritual.
Ritual. Yep.
It's a codependent activity. And all of a sudden Susan starts and Joe just keeps asking her questions and tell me more. And then what happened next? And then how did you feel? And then what did you do? And all of a sudden the entire evening goes by and Joe never says anything. And then he wakes up the next morning and he goes, "Oh my God, I learned this lesson and I never applied it. Pindar is going to be so upset with me that I don't have a story as to how I applied the lesson that I learned."
Right.
And and Joe finds a note from Susan, and Susan is just so grateful that Joe took the entire evening and listened to everything that was important to her and everything that was bothering her and everything that she wanted and all of her feelings and just how much she loved him. And he looked at that note and he goes, "That's it. Put others' interests above your own." And that's exactly what he did last night. And he applied the lesson without even really knowing what he was doing. And it was just it's always interesting how an opportunity presents itself and you don't even really recognize it until it's gone. And it's like, oh, that was a great opportunity. I kind of judged it in the beginning as being disappointing. And then I reflect on it going, hey, where do we go from here? How do we spend this? How do we leverage this? How can we make it better? And then, at the end of the chapter, they talked about, the real essence is, stop keeping score,
Yeah,
stop making your interests as important as somebody else's and keeping things everything even.
that's right. And so go out and help other people, not looking for something, but knowing that in the broad scheme of things, you're going to be known as a sort of person who helps others, and therefore you'll have those walking ambassadors, those people that
Mm,
say, and I know you get this a lot, Scott. You have
mm,
people, we a lot of the businesses Scott and I work together are because somebody that he knows referred him to someone else, and he knows a lot of
mhm.
people in this town, and I think that's important. And we don't keep score; we just try to help.
And I have a
I know
goal.
you hate to help, but
Well, I hate a mutual
helping
commitment to a
salespeople.
common goal, a mutual commitment to a common goal, and I want to be able to live that public commitment to my profession, and I want to be out there, and I want to be accountable to the industry and the marketplace, and I want to be held accountable to the solutions, the advice, and the results that my clients get because they apply those solutions that I propose. They get all the credit because they had the guts and courage to apply it. But thanks, Bill.
And I would encourage our listeners to be applying these things just like Joe's trying to,
Yeah.
these principles. Yeah. All right. Well, our
Good.
next topic is maintaining your profit margin. And Scott and I know, and we have lots of conversations with sales directors, CFOs, and the common complaint is the salespeople don't care about profit margin. And what I found is that a lot of sales leaders don't care about profit margin either, because it's always these organizations that always talk about top line growth, top line growth, top line growth. What do we do? What are our sales? What are our sales? What are our sales? And the raw sales numbers, and that is so short sighted,
Hmm.
because raw sales numbers don't necessarily translate into profitability. But when we're rewarded only on top sales growth, then what are we going to do? We don't care about the profitability. We just care about getting more sales out. My son works for an organization. He's involved as part of the sales channel, and he's always trying to, his job is to maintain the profitability, and he's always fighting with the sales leaders who are saying, oh, let's give this special deal. He goes, that customer's too small to give that special deal to. They
Hmm.
don't fit the parameters of that. Oh, but they've been a customer for a long time.
I,
Who gives a rip? They're a lousy customer that we lose money on every month, and you want to somehow consider them a showcase
right,
of,
right.
of how great we are. They don't make any money. They have too many. Oh, it drives me crazy with companies not caring about their growth. Well, if you're the kind of sales leader who cares about maintaining profit margin, or if you're going to be compensated on margin as well as on top line growth, this is going to be a good topic for you. Scott and I think about it all the time. We own the companies that we work for, and we know that every time we take a dollar off the proposal, where does that dollar come from, Scott?
Well, it comes from net profit, or we
That's
end up cutting the value that we offer.
well, and we don't cut the value that we offer because that's not the way we do
Well,
business. So we know we're
that's
going to
right
give
too.
them the
That's
same
true
thing.
too.
We're not going to say, oh, you don't get X, Y, and Z. Now, I will use that as a negotiating tactic. When they
Hmm.
say, you need to cut this by 10%, I say, well, what 10% of the value do you want to cut out?
Right.
And they never want to cut any of the value out. And then we have a different kind of conversation. So anyway, what are some of your thoughts? I'm going off on a rant here. So what are your thoughts
I
on
I
profitability?
I've had many debates with CFOs that don't want to invest any money because the company's not profitable. And I keep telling them, you're not going to raise top line revenue by cutting expenses. you will eventually reduce top line revenue and you will have a bigger problem. And that is an increased cost in sales and marketing for more customer acquisitions because you don't have enough revenue to cover some of the fixed expenses that are already coming in to the business. So it's really understanding how do you generate more profit is really increasing more revenue. So if you increase more revenue, then you're only, in some cases, increasing the variable expenses, but you're covering more revenue to cover the fixed expenses. And that's where I think a lot of CFOs kind of get confused about sales and marketing. And if
Mm-hmm.
there's any department that nobody understands, it's sales. And you think about how sales is treated so much differently than every other organization is because people have a tough time understanding it.
Yeah,
And it is somewhat elusive.
I worked with a company once, and they had me come in and do a negotiation course because the vice president said that my people are collapsing when it comes to negotiation. So I did this negotiation course, and halfway through, the people looked at me like I was an idiot. And I said,
Mm-hmm.
"All right, what's wrong?" Because you get a feeling right
Right,
after a
right.
couple hours that you're talking about the wrong. They said, "We don't collapse. The vice president collapses."
Yes.
And if we hold the line, our customers will go to him and he'll collapse and he'll give
Right.
them whatever they want. And he wants to be the hero. So we decide we'll be the hero for a while. And now he's mad that he doesn't get to be the hero. So I made
Mm-hmm.
the mistake of going and telling him that, and then he fired me. But that's okay
It is.
because he needed to know the truth. I've learned, that was when I was really young. I've learned since then to find a better way to say that, you're the person who's causing the problem. But profitability is so important, and I really learned my lesson when I started my career at Radio Shack, and this was back in the 80s. And when what we got paid for at Radio Shack was I got a salary, I got some commission on sales, but what I really made my money on was, we called it inventory growth. So everything was booked at a certain percentage. If I could sell more of the stuff that had a high profit margin, my inventory would increase, my store profitability would increase, and I got paid a percentage of profitability. So if my profitability was 10%, I got 10% of that. If it was 15%, I got 15% of that. Well, in 1983, 82, 83, my bonus was $15,000.
Wow.
And that would be over $50,000 now. I went out and bought a nice little sports car with that money. Now, if I
Mm-hmm.
had invested, it would be worth over $1 million now. So it's kind of stupid, but I got a nice car out of the deal.
Yeah.
Anyway, I understood profitability, and I've been a profitability hound since then. But how do we keep that, right? Because the customers are going to give us pressure to push down the price.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So what do we do to not give them the discount that they might ask for? And we know that its price is too high is a lie. They're always going to
Mm-hmm.
say that,
Right. Right.
but but they're just looking for a price reduction. So
Mm-hmm.
so what do we do? So I've got two big areas, right? What
Yeah.
do we do to avoid the price question so that it maybe doesn't even come up? And then what do we do if the price question does come up? So I'm going to tell you something you haven't heard from me before, a
Yes.
totally new message.
Okay.
Do good discovery.
Yeah, that's not new.
That's
That's
not
not,
new. I've said that
no.
before. Have I said that before?
I think our listeners are kind of shaking their head too, going, "No, Bill,
I
you've said
can't
that before."
stress how important good discovery is to keeping your profit margin and avoiding the price question, because what you're talking to them about and what you're showing them fits exactly into what they said they needed.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's a great fit between what their vision of the need is and what your vision of the solution is, we just don't find that price question comes up very often.
Right. Right.
So you got to know what the customer values. That overcomes price. So, number one, take time to prepare, to think about and prepare useful questions. The good questions will not come to you in the middle of your conversation. What will come to you in the middle of your conversation is, let me tell them about my product.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I'll find a little crack, a little opening, a little need, and I'll start filling it with product because I don't have any more questions left.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
So, anyway, what do you think about that?
So true. I think in order for you to set up what's going to be most valuable, you need to find out what's most important and what's most relevant. And if you're not finding that out, then you're just throwing out solutions that have no value, no application, which means nobody's going to write a check out for them. So
Yeah.
you have to know that.
Yeah, and we think that we're going to get those early, but sometimes customers hide those real values.
Hmm.
until a little bit of trust is built up. So it's not going to, those real deep values are not going to come in the first 5 minutes of your conversation. They're going to come later on when you've developed some trust. You've kind of built that ladder of trust up, and they're able to say, what's really bugging me, or what I
Hmm.
really don't like about my current supplier, or if this happens one more time, I might get fired. I need you to save me. Then you're going to start to find those things out later. So the prepared questions are really important. I also think it's important, Scott, to ask them in a building order.
Hmm.
You
True.
don't start with the tough questions first because they won't tell you because trust hasn't been built up.
Hmm.
So you ask questions about how many and how often and what do you like about the current supplier and where's your growth happening and all these really positive questions. And then you build up trust through those positive questions and then you ask the tougher questions later on. So it's really important to look at the order of how you're asking those and then make sure you're taking good notes because
Hmm.
the very fact that you're taking notes says to them that their answers are important.
Hmm. I've heard some people say that they're uncomfortable asking questions and taking notes because they feel like they're deposing a witness for a trial.
Mm.
And I always say, if you're uncomfortable with anything, ask permission. I've gone into, conference rooms and I know that I'm meeting with 4 or 5 people, and the last thing that I want to do is sit in somebody else's chair. So whoever invited me in, I'll ask, where would you like me to sit? And then they'll point to a chair because everybody else kind of like
Has their
cows
chair. Yeah.
at milking has their own stall. And you can't, I mean, once a cow knows what stall they're supposed to go in, that's what stall they go into naturally. And I want to create as much comfort and reduce the amount of distraction when it comes to working with a company. Backing up to your questions, I think another great strategy, a technique, is if somebody says a statement, be quiet, pause, don't
Mm.
answer. Silence is so powerful because when they give you a statement, you don't know if there's a question that's going to follow when they're contemplating the question to ask. But if you're quiet and they're uncomfortable because they feel like you may have a little bit of an upper hand because you have something that they want, they're going to keep talking, and it's going to be a natural habit for them to do that. And then you know that you have trust and rapport established at that point. So it's very
A great
effective.
way to stay quiet?
How?
Finish your notes. If I'm
Yes,
still
yes.
writing on the statement that that person made,
That's very good.
then I'm being quiet because I'm thinking about what they said, not what I want to say and how I want to
Right.
respond. So they're looking at me taking those notes and they're thinking of their next question or idea or issue, and they might just keep talking. And as you
Yeah,
say, when they're talking, the more they're talking, the more I'm
exactly.
learning. I think
Exactly.
Lou Holt said, I never learned anything talking.
Yes.
And I believe in that. So, and then don't think about answering their concerns. Think about driving deeper with more questions,
Yes.
right? So these aren't always questions I have on my list, but the important questions are really, well, how did that happen?
Yeah.
What happens when that occurs?
Hmm.
What are the results of that? How
Hmm.
did that make you? How did that make you feel? How did that challenge you? All those drill down and follow up questions are going to get to the meat of it rather than going on to the next question on your list.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
make sure you're not just asking the questions on your list, but you're drilling into their statements.
I think the goal of a salesperson is to uncover the intent behind the content. The content is what they're saying and what they're asking. Your goal as a salesperson is to wonder what their intent is. I'm kind of curious, why are they bringing that up now?
Mm-hmm.
Why did they use those particular words to describe the situation? How come they didn't wait? How come they waited this long to be able to tell me that or ask me that? And you're going to be able to find that in a conversation of good questions, you're going to trigger them to be able to find more applications to your solution. Wow. How about that? More applications to your solutions, and you didn't even talk about all the features and benefits of what you offer, but just through the questions, they're seeing more applications to it.
I mean, I bet you can count the number of times you've been in a sales situation. You've asked good questions. You've come up to something that's really a challenging thing. And all you had to do at the end was go, well, Scott, we can handle that.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
they're
yeah,
like, oh, great.
yeah,
I don't need a
exactly.
big proposal. I just need the trust has been built. I can look you in the eye and say, we can help you with that. And they're ready to move on because
Yeah.
I listened thoroughly to them. And
Hmm.
I was, you talked about interrogation.
Yeah.
how you ask the questions. Is there
True.
sincerity in your voice? Is there concern in your voice? Are you taking notes? Do you care? Are you asking the clarifying questions that show you listen to the last answer they gave you? If not, then you're going to sound like you're in an interrogation. But if you have
Yeah.
sincerity and you have caring and curiosity, you won't. It's all about intent.
So true. So true.
All right, number two, when the price concerns come up, I say you use your value advantages to resolve those concerns.
Hmm.
Right. So I used an example before. I sit down with a proposal. They say, well, we need this cheaper. And I say, well, what do you want to cut out?
Right.
Because my assumption is not that I can make it cheaper or I overpriced this product. My assumption is I'm giving you great value. In order for me to drop the price, I have to give you less value.
Mm.
And they don't want less value. They just want a cheaper price. Now, you have a great question about price too. When somebody says this is too much or this is too
Yeah. Yeah.
expensive,
Yeah. Yeah. How much too much? I mean, is it $1 more? Is it $10 too much? Is it $100 too much? And then once you start looking at where their perception of value is and what they're willing to exchange value with a dollar bill is, then you can fill in the gap with some of the things that they don't know in order for them to fill in that gap and go, okay, now the value meets the price. Thank you
right?
for
Right.
being a leader in that.
Yeah. Or another question is, and I think you've told me this one, compared to what?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Your price is too high. Compared to what?
Yeah.
Well, compared to what I thought it would be. Oh,
Hmm. When
well,
was the
maybe
last
you
time
were
you made
mistaken. Maybe you were mistaken about what something like this should cost.
when was the last time you bought tires?
That's right. That's right.
4 years ago.
Yeah, we were.
They've gone up.
Yeah, we're all mistaken about prices right now. Everything's more expensive.
Hmm.
So I think that's really important. So what I'm trying to get to is when somebody says the price is wrong or drop the price, you need to go back to what did they say was important,
Exactly.
right? Scott, you told
Yeah.
me that it was important to get XYZ. Is that still true? Well, yeah, I still need that. Okay. Do you see where we have that in this contract? Do you see where we're providing that value
Hmm.
for you? Well, yeah, I do. Well, then maybe that's why it's a little bit more expensive than you thought because that value to provide that costs us money. And
Mm.
again, the bad negotiating salesperson will try to give all those values away instead
Hmm.
of making those values worth something. Just because we always do things on time doesn't mean that's without value. If part of our process is to always get this contract done when we say we're going to get it done and get the merchandise to you, the supply to you, whatever it is, the product to you, that's a high value.
Hmm.
And don't short sight it by saying, oh yeah, we always do that. No,
Right.
we're going to
Right. No.
promise this. And that promise to you has a value to it. So think about those promises that you've made during this courtship ritual, the questioning, and then when you come back with the proposal, remind them and show them how each of those value advantages that you're going to give them are there. They identified those value advantages because they weren't getting them from their current supplier. Things were coming in late all the time and we had to pause our production because we weren't getting things on time. That's a big deal.
Mm.
That's worth
Hmm.
something. If
Right.
you have to stop production because you're missing a chip,
Mm.
well, then
Yeah.
not gonna you're gonna waste everybody's day,
Right.
or
We've
you're
seen
gonna
that.
have a backlog of everything that's waiting around for that chip. So what the promises that we make are very valuable. Those are our value advantages. Just a couple of other things, just as we wrap up. Don't get trapped into competitive comparisons, right? They're
Oh,
going to
yeah.
say
Yeah.
our current supplier is better. You just say, look, I can't deal with what your current supplier is doing. Here's what the promises I can make to you. If those are of value and I can show you that I can deliver those things, then we're gonna be able to work together. So there's a reason that they talk to you. And then finally, if you need to negotiate, change the terms of the deal, right? As I
Right.
said, what would you be willing to take away? Do you want to go to a lower quality product? Do you want to lose the guarantee that we'll deliver on time? What is it that you'd want to get rid of and take out of this? And make them say that. And maybe they'll even identify something that you've put in there that they don't really want.
Right. I mean, that's kind of the takeaway close. When you start taking away a solution after they recognize the value that they would receive with it sticking to a problem or goal that they have, they don't like to give something up that they have. This is called lost aversion, very influential. And if you've done a good enough job of really uncovering the relevant situation, you've proposed a solution that's going to change the outcome, and all the numbers make sense, that's a great way to maintain a customer, maintain top line revenue, and to maintain profitability. So they all interact together, but salespeople are the engine that pulls the train, and salespeople are the ones that are going to determine how much revenue comes in. They just need to be able to be conscious about also keeping a profit in mind. And it
That's
sounds
right.
like that's kind of the theme of this topic, Bill.
Yeah, you have to think about the profitability of your company. You might get paid on raw numbers, but your company won't be in business if you can't make profit off that customer.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and we can go into a whole nother episode on the formula for profitability and how to compensate salespeople. And
Oh,
there's
that's a
so many
worm. That's a
different,
worm I don't want to get
yeah,
into.
I know, but there's a lot there. So
Yeah.
it's almost describing the two political parties and what they have in common and what they have in
Uh,
difference.
let's not
That's
get
a
we won't get into politics now.
that's
All
a
right.
big show.
So that's what we have. Two big
Yeah,
things to avoid price concerns. Do really good discovery by preparing your questions, and then if you do get into price concerns, make sure you ask good questions about how they'd want to change the deal. Don't just drop your price and give them the same whole value that they were getting before.
yeah, yeah. Great advice. Great advice. And I've got a golden nugget that ties in, I think, perfectly with the go giver and the topic that we covered today. And this is from Bob Wolf, who's a sports agent. And it is, I have one thing that's not negotiable. I demand that I meet your interest. The reason I want to meet your interest is that if I don't meet your interest, you won't meet mine. And I'm a very selfish guy. I want my interest met. And I thought, what a great position of going first in a negotiation is really finding out what the other person wants.
Yep.
And then if you identify that, you can almost ask for anything in return as long as they get what they want.
Yep. But we don't ask. We don't find out what they want.
Right?
We
Exactly.
start to tell. So don't go into your meetings with a telling attitude. Right.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
going to do you any
Exactly.
good. All right. For this quote, for all the information that we have, go to winningatselling.com. Our show notes, everything will be there.
So next week, no book club and our special guest, and we'll announce it on this episode 599. Our special guest is Joe Schmidt. If you live in the Minneapolis area, you recognize that name. He's been on Channel 5. He's written the book, The Silent Impact, and he's really talking about how sports professionals practice. This is going to be a topic that I think is transferable with sports professionals and sales professionals, is how sports professionals practice. So please subscribe and share this podcast with your colleagues on social media.
Go out and get better one skill at a time.
Joyful selling.